What the heck? What's up, you guys? How's it going? How you doing? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, shut up. I don't care. Now that I am a YouTuber, officially, again, I'm looking to take my channel to the big freaking times, okay? I want to see a freaking million views on my channel. I want to see a million subs. So what do I gotta do? You know what I gotta do. I gotta start some flippin' drama, guys. I gotta find a YouTuber who's around my same size, does around the same thing as me, and I just gotta dig into him as hard as I can. I gotta just, you know what I mean? Ow. I gotta go in on somebody. So let me see if I can find someone. Okay. Enhance. I think we got someone.
Round 1, fight!
You know, just kidding about all of that. This guy seems like an incredibly wholesome and awesome and nice guy. In fact, I quite like his reviews. He's an expert when it comes to structuring his reviews and giving his reviews in a very concise and quick manner, which I am personally terrible at, so I'm actually kind of jealous of his reviews. So I'd like for you to check them out before I go in on this guy, but I'm more so gonna be using his reviews as a jumping off point for a bigger idea for this video, which you'll see soon. But anyways, his videos are structured like this. He's got a quick intro, quick synopsis, he talks a bit about a few specific things he liked or didn't, and then he gets into his 6 pillars, his 6 criteria of what he calls good filmmaking. And those 6 criteria are plot, acting and script, character development, CGI, and rewatchability. And those are some pretty good pillars, you know, those are all important things I would say for a movie that include them. I would say it's somewhat limiting to only go with 6 though. I'd say there are a lot of other things that can make a good movie, like cinematography, you know, color, tone, sound design, choreography. That's a pretty good list to start with. Another complaint I have with that list though is that, you know, he talks about CGI, but he doesn't talk at all about practical effects, and personally, I just like practical effects more than I like CGI, so that's just a personal complaint, and I can understand why he would mostly talk about CGI, because most of the movies that he does review include more CGI than they do practical effects, so I'm not gonna really get too mad about that. But you're probably yelling at your screen right now, buddy, hold on a second, you only did 5 pillars, 5 criterias. Where's this mystery 6th criteria going? What are you hiding from me? Well, hold your horses now, because I was just about to get to it, and his last pillar is family friendliness. Now, in every one of his reviews, he talks very, very in-depth about how family friendly this piece of media is, and this is in terms of things like profanity, sexuality, graphic violence, stuff like that. This seems like a perfectly normal thing to talk about in a review, which I would agree it is to a certain extent, but it's more so his framing of the family friendliness that I start to get a little bit, you know, I start to do a little bit of a, So in his critic's frame, when a movie is less family friendly, it is less good in his opinion, or at least that's how I'm seeing it at this current moment. And to use one of his videos as an example, let's check out Peter Bits' review of The Suicide Squad. Let's just throw on the old cans here.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel.
Hey, what's up, man? Welcome back to mine.
Today I wanted to talk about The Suicide Squad.
So the first thing to note here is that he says he's a fan of James Gunn.
The Suicide Squad, when I saw that it was going to be directed by James Gunn, I was immediately excited for it because I'm a huge fan of his work in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Okay, so he's not familiar with James Gunn's past work, which is fine, but it will become important later in this review because, you know, he's saying he's a fan of Guardians of the Galaxy, which is some of his more recent Disney stuff, so it'll become important maybe.
The Suicide Squad is comprised of basically terrible villains and people from the DC universe, and they go in and do these missions where they will more than likely die, but if they ever decide to not do what has been mandated for them to do, there's a chip that's in the back of their neck that Amanda Waller is not afraid to detonate and kill them on the spot.
Okay, so The Suicide Squad sounds like a pretty edgy movie. I wonder how he feels about it in terms of family friendliness.
So this movie is not family friendly whatsoever. Even my wife had a hard time watching it because of how bloody and gory it was. That stuff doesn't bother me as much, but what does bother me is nudity. And unfortunately, James Gunn decided to include a couple extremely unnecessary nude scenes in this movie. Besides that, this movie is definitely one of the most gory movies I've seen, and the profanity is through the roof as well. And it's pushing the line for adults as well when it comes to what you're willing to watch. It is gross. Some of the shots that you see are pretty disgusting. So thumbs down for family friendliness.
He gives it a big thumbs down, which is his opinion, and that's totally okay. But what I am interested in is, why is that his opinion? You know, why did he take points off of the movie for it not being family friendly? Because in my mind, making a movie about convicted supervillains and being sent out to be slaughtered in these suicide missions by the government against your consent, those don't really seem like family-friendly elements to base a movie on. And so making this movie more family-friendly, would it actually improve the film? I mean, personally, I don't think so. I think James Gunn's decision to really lean into the gore and really lean into the edgy sort of dark humor, I think that benefits the film. It created a more fitting tone for the movie, I'd say. For one, the over-the-top violence actually helps the audience by the fact that we're actually seeing supervillains and not just heroes who are misunderstood, you know? Not only that, but it helps us empathize with these characters, you know, in the opening scene where, spoiler alert, Pete Davidson gets his freaking head blown off. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts, his head is just turned into a freaking gushing melon, okay? And it really just helps you understand that these guys, they're screwed. They're like done. They're the Suicide Squad. And the violence is what helps sell that, for me anyways. It immediately shows you how little regard the government has for them, how little regard their enemies have for them, and how little regard that they have for themselves in some cases. You know, not only that, but I don't think it would be convincing or authentic to have a bunch of supervillains walking around saying things like, "Oh, frick, man. Oh, frick, man, when I got shot, that really hurt." Or, "Oh, what the heck, dude? What the heck, dude? This freaking mission is a Suicide Squad mission. What the heck?"
What, we some kind of
Suicide Squad?
You know, I don't think that would make the film more immersive, in my opinion. That would take me out of it. It would still be funny, granted, but it would be funny for, in my opinion, the wrong reasons. And so I think James Gunn really killed it with the Suicide Squad, and I think part of its success is some of the more edgy, not family-friendly elements. Don't get it twisted, James Gunn is really kind of a master of all of these sort of edgy elements. While yes, the Guardians of the Galaxy movies are pretty sanitized, pretty family-friendly in comparison to some of his past works are incredibly edgy. Like movies like Slither and Super are incredibly gory and incredibly edgy, and so like I think the fact that he hasn't seen James Gunn's past work is sort of indicative in this review. It's very clear because James Gunn's style is very strongly rooted in sort of this edgy, gritty material that isn't so much present in Guardians of the Galaxy, but he leaned into for Suicide Squad, and I like that a lot. But, you know, what am I getting at here? He's claiming that the lack of family friendliness is an overall drawback to the movie. It's really his only criticism that is voiced that strongly in the review, and it ultimately brings it down to a 7.5 out of 10 for him.
With that being said, there were some drawbacks. Not a fan of the nudity. This movie is terribly gory. There were some elements that weren't great. All in all, I'd probably have to give this movie a 7.5 out of 10.
I obviously don't agree with this, but let's just take a step back from this and use a few other movies as an example to see maybe what I'm getting at a little bit better. So, you know, an obvious starting point is the horror genre. I can't think of very many horror movies that don't include not family-friendly elements. You know, the entire point of horror is to scare you, put you on edge, put you out of your comfort zone, and the most effective means of doing that is generally things like death, gore, you know, demonic forces, you know, creepy dudes killing people, you know, so that's generally not in the family-friendly territory. Why would anyone want to see stuff like that in the first place, you know? Like, it's scary and it's negative. Why would you want to see that, you know? A lot of people don't understand it, including my parents. But let me see if it's possible to explain using a movie I really love. And that movie is called Hereditary. This movie truly shook me to my core. Like, it is so scary, and it, you know, it has things like gore and, other disturbing elements, not family-friendly elements. But the story is far, far more terrifying beyond the scope of just those things, The truly terrifying presence haunting the movie is trauma and how it can tear apart a family, and, it asks us if we're fated to tragedy by our lineage and if we can overcome what you have done or cope with what others have done. So you may be asking, okay then, does it need those not family-friendly elements to be an effective story? Maybe not. Maybe not. I can see a very stripped down version of Hereditary where it doesn't include things like demonic forces or gore, but the entire film is seeking to depict trauma, so when it doesn't pull any of these punches, it helps you feel what the characters are feeling. You feel their dread, their anger, their desperation, and you feel their fear, of course. Not only that, it uses its satanic and demonic and cult elements as allegory to further drive home all of its themes, which is also really important to the story. So I think that while the story could be told in a family-friendly manner, much of the punch would be taken out of it if you tried to do that. But yeah, I just love Hereditary, and I don't think that the film would succeed quite as much if it didn't have those elements to really take it over the limit, because I think what a lot of people say about Hereditary is that they couldn't stay up for nights after watching it, and all of that isn't because of these non-family friendly elements. I would say all of that goes back to something much deeper, but those sort of scary not family friendly elements help add to that a little bit. There are also many films that seek to depict vice, things like gambling, drinking, drug abuse, sex. These are all very real things that people struggle to cope with sometimes in our society, and films that depict this struggle, films that depict this struggle are very, very interesting to me. And I think a really good example is Trainspotting. This film is about a group of Scottish heroin addicts, about what leads them to this lifestyle. It's about their bleak outlook on their lives. It's about the desperation they have in feeding their addiction and how impossible for them it feels to escape their own addiction. It doesn't really hold back anything in this depiction, and the fact that it goes even beyond real-world logic to depict this lifestyle is very, very interesting to me. Ewan McGregor, he dives headfirst into the nastiest toilet in all of Scotland just to get back this last little piece of heroin. When he shoots up and ultimately overdoses, it shows him sinking literally into the floor. And when he's going through withdrawals, he's stuck in this nightmare of babies crawling on his ceiling, dead babies, and his dead friends haunting him, and it's incredibly terrifying, and none of it is family friendly, none of it whatsoever, nor even strictly realistic. But I would argue that all of these elements help make the film feel emotionally real. They are incredibly over the top visualizations of what these experiences might be like. Because of that, this movie is by far the most effective anti-heroin PSA I've ever seen. Because of this movie, and obviously because of the overall context surrounding the drug heroin, I would never want to get near a situation where heroin is even present because of how low it takes these characters. And this movie works not only because it shows how high they get, but also how low they get, and that's really, really important. And it shows just the extremity of those two positions and how easy it is to go from one to the other, and that's really, really important for a movie like this. Without these elements in the story, without these non-family friendly elements, this depiction of a lifestyle would not become such an emotionally engaging story, but two, just like an example by which to say, hey, maybe using heroin is not the best idea, you know what I mean? What about religious stories? Surely a story about good old heebie-jeebie Jesus Christ shouldn't have any sex, any drugs, violence in it, right? Right, you might be asking? Well, nah.
Hey, bitch, you better praise God or I'ma shoot and that's on God, I ain't playing.
The two most notable examples of religious films I can think of off the top of my head aren't really family friendly at all. The first one I can think of is called The Passion of the Christ, and that film was directed by a certain flaming anti-Semite named Mel Gibson.
Who wants to eat? Who the f*** wants to eat? Go have something to eat! Esterhaus blamed Gibson when the script bombed, branding him an anti-Semitic loon who called Jewish people oven dodgers, threatened to kill then partner Oksana Grigorieva.
I gotta work! You're getting paid! I'm not! I have earned money, boy!
This film is an extremely graphic depiction of Christ's last 12 hours, leading up to and ultimately including his very violent torture and his very violent death. Despite this, though, the movie was one of the highest grossing rated R movies for a very long time. I think it was actually usurped by something like Deadpool or Joker, but for a while it was one of the highest grossing rated R movies of all time. It was widely embraced by its audience of, evangelical Christians, but am I a fan of this film? Not at all. In fact, quoting the ADL, which they're not exactly the most reliable in all circumstances, but they do say that at every single opportunity, Mr. Gibson's film reinforces the notion that the Jewish authorities and the Jewish mob are the ones ultimately responsible for the crucifixion. We are also concerned about those who are already disposed unfavorably towards Jews and will use this to fan the flames of hatred. So it seems like the film maybe picked up some of the anti-Semitism of its creator, but even besides that, the film doesn't really have anything to offer. Its main draw is the very violent depiction of Jesus' torture and crucifixion, which in and of itself, that's not a terrible part of the movie, I have no qualms with it, and I think that showing the extremity of Jesus' torture and how much he went through, I do think that can make for an effective story and helping Christians understand how much Jesus must have loved them and how much passion he must have had to go through such an experience. But while it does do that to an extent, that's about all it does, The story assumes that the audience is familiar with Jesus and his story. Because of that, the story sort of glosses over a lot of the heart of Jesus' story, in my opinion. The focus is a lot more on how godly Jesus was and how much of a godly figure he was, rather than how much of a human he was. And personally, for me, that's just less of an engaging story, but also it probably makes for a good experience for a Christian audience. But for people outside of the Christian world, it's probably less engaging. So I'd argue that despite this being a religious story about Jesus, the non-family friendly elements, the crucifixion and the violence are sort of one of the most effective parts of that story. But how about we look at another Jesus story, this time directed by MCU opponent Martin Scorsese. In this film is The Last Temptation of Christ, featuring Willem Dafoe as Jesus. And if you haven't seen this movie, I suggest you watch it, no matter who you are. It's an amazing movie. Willem Dafoe is an excellent Jesus, and it's a Martin Scorsese movie, so it's well directed. Anything you could expect from a good Scorsese flick, it's probably in there. But even for myself, who's pretty non-religious, pretty firmly non-religious, it's an incredibly powerful story. It depicts Jesus' struggle between humanity and godliness. It shows him trying to reconcile the fact that he was born a flawed human and a holy son of God. It shows his journey from carpenter to Messiah and the doubt he had not only in himself, but his holy quest. It shows him coping with what is demanded of him as the savior of humanity, and most importantly, it shows his titular last temptation, which as he's on the cross, he's offered a way out, and he's given a way to live as just a human for once, and to reject the holy path and embrace apathy. And we see him give into this temptation and what that would mean for the world around him. But ultimately, we do see Jesus return and finish his holy quest, so it does have a good ending there. But while this film is based on a fictional telling of Christ's life, I do think that it is a much emotionally truer story for me. I think one way it does this is by realistically showing what Jesus was up against in that time. We're talking prostitution, we're talking violence, both political and non-political. We're talking about demonic forces. So I think all of these elements being included in the story enhance it, because it shows in a much truer way what Jesus was sort of faced against in that time. And it shows Jesus briefly giving into this titular last temptation, and that leads to a sex scene between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And that's probably what ended up getting the film so much ire in the eye of evangelical Christians at the time. By shifting the focus away from Jesus as some remote and holy savior, and instead casting him in a light that is more about Jesus being a relatable person and being a human, I found that element a lot more engaging in this movie. Any religious story should be about faith on some level, right? But this movie is the best depiction of faith I've ever seen. Seeing Jesus be some godly superhero doesn't inspire a single lick of faith in me, but seeing Jesus be a guy who's struggling but still manages to be, you know, the Son of God, and still manages to carry out something so much greater than himself while still being just a guy, even though he is the Son of God. I think that's so much more relatable, and that does inspire faith in me because it gives me a much more realer vision of something that I can work towards. You know, the whole mantra is, what would Jesus do? And, you know, if Jesus is just this 100% perfect guy who never had a doubt in the world, like, how am I supposed to relate to that? Because every single second of every day for me is spent in doubt at some level. And so having a depiction of Jesus where he was also in doubt about what he was supposed to do, that just feels so much more real to me. That feels so much more true and inspires faith in me as someone who is not even religious. So I would say that this movie is really, really good because of that. Not only that, but the surrounding characters have so much depth. You know, Judas, we know that guy as the son of a bitch who sold Jesus out for some coin. Well, even he's got this really, really strong relationship with Jesus, and all of the decisions he makes throughout the narrative are all so well reasoned, and the dialogue that they have with each other is just so deep. And Pontius Pilate, the judge who ends up sending Jesus to the old cross, even he's a strong character, and he's played by David Bowie, man. What did Christians in the 80s think of this film? They hated it. You know, it garnered a lot of controversy. A lot of it was because of the depiction of, you know, old JC doing the dirty with Mary Magdalene. That inspired a lot of controversy. But even outside of that, Christian critics were saying that this depiction of Jesus was wimpy, he was ineffectual, and they pretty much hated it for the entire reason that I liked it. So, I mean, I'm not a Christian, so I'm not really one to say, but I would inspire, or I would ask Christians to watch this movie and tell me what they think, because to me, I think this movie speaks truer to Jesus's life and his mission much, much better than The Passion of the Christ. And neither of those movies have family-friendly elements, so what does that say, huh? I've talked about how non-family friendly elements can enhance a movie. You know, we went over those examples that all included non-family friendly elements, but let me play devil's advocate now, or should I say God's advocate, and talk about the other side of the conversation, the argument for family friendliness. So first, a good argument for family friendliness in content is simply the idea that some people just don't like seeing bad things, you know? A good example would be someone living with PTSD of some kind. You know, seeing graphic depictions of certain kinds of violence can just trigger their symptoms, and that's not good. You know, not only that, but certain people just have aversions to that kind of thing, you know? Some people just they just don't feel good when they see things like, you know, violence or, you know, just certain things. People just don't like to see it. That's understandable. That can be a religious reason or a personality thing. There are just plenty of people who don't like to be scared or don't like to be made uncomfortable when they're watching movies, and that's okay. You know, if they get zero artistic satisfaction from, you know, experiences with those elements in it, who am I to say they ought to seek them out? Who am I to say that they should be exposed to that? No one, you know? Family-friendly content should exist by all means. But is it possible to tell the same kind of emotionally mature and emotionally real stories that non-family friendly stories do? Well, yes. Yes, actually, let's take a look at a few. Avatar: The Last Airbender, not the movie, is probably the best example for me. It's a show about so many things that you would never consider as fodder for a kid's show. You know, it deals with Aang's struggle to balance his own desires with the world-saving responsibilities, his fight to stay connected with his long-gone culture, and his fight for spiritual guidance and fulfillment. It's also about Zuko's journey overcoming his anger, his belief in his imperialist nation, his need to prove himself to his abusive father, and him ultimately finding a community. This show is excellent in its world building and character development. It never treats its audience like it's stupid, despite its wide appeal. It has so many deeply moral questions to ask its characters that are on par with any film I've mentioned thus far. It does all of this while being so clean and easy to follow. And man, Avatar: The Last Airbender, man, this is just a absolute gold standard in telling an emotionally mature kid's story. Watch it if you haven't. No matter what your age is, you will enjoy it. You will find something to enjoy in it, I promise you. Another movie to talk about is Coraline. I mean, this movie is terrifying. I mean, this movie is literally terrifying. I remember one Christmas, my parents gifted it to my sister, okay? And we sat down, we watched it as a family. The rest of my family, they were so off put by this movie. They were legitimately scared by this movie, but I loved it, man. I mean, I was scared too, but I just remember even thinking in that moment, I was like, whoa, this is cool. I've never seen anything like this. This was probably one of the first times a movie really scared the pants off of me, and I freaking love that feeling, man. I actually rewatched it pretty recently to see if it was still an effective piece of horror all these years later. You know, I gotta say it holds up. You know, the claymation allows for just such creative character design, location design, and character movements and sequences, and it's all complemented with this thoughtful and stylistic like cinematography and framing and transitions, because it's got these drowned out colors and beaten down looking characters in the beginning, and it helps us feel how bleak the real world is for Coraline. And then when she goes into this other world, you know, we see how much more the colors pop, we see how much more fantasy like this other world is, and it helps us want to go there just like Coraline, and it helps us sell the betrayal that ultimately comes of this other world. You know, the themes are simple, but they're told throughout the narrative in incredibly intelligent and mature ways through things like symbolism and allegory. For instance, these other characters have buttons for eyes and offer Coraline a fantastical life if only she gives up her eyeballs and sews in these buttons. And I took that as a symbol for Coraline's perspective throughout the story. And so, same goes for much of the story elements. There is some kind of allegory or some kind of thematic material to it. And so while it does have these certainly very mild, suggestive elements throughout it, it's a family-friendly experience on the whole, and it is an incredibly effective and stylish horror film. And I said earlier in this video that it's very rare that a family-friendly movie is also a horror movie. Well, this is one of them. So if you're looking for a very, very easy way to dip your toes into the horror genre but still get an effective scare out of it, I would highly recommend Coraline for all of my horror newbies out there. Ow, my elbow! Comedy, I think, is something that can be hard to nail for experiences aimed at the family. In fact, I'd say that there's a lot of media that's aimed at kids that treats them like they're entirely stupid and resort to just crude or loud jokes. But I think the unquestioned king of family-friendly comedy has gotta be SpongeBob, man. I can't think of a single cartoon that has so many references that so many people would understand. It has sourced so many memes and just overall is loved by so many people despite their age. How does a kid's cartoon reach these heights? Well, for one, the humor is absurdist, and so that gives it a lot of freedom in the ideas it explores, you know,
Who put you on the planet?
and the comedic bits that it does. It takes full advantage of this freedom by having weird, unsettling bits, fantastical musical numbers, you know, breaking the fourth wall, and so much more. It can also be, you know, surprisingly mature at moments, like the dynamic between Squidward and SpongeBob, you know, one being sort of a bright, optimistic, very cheery, imaginative one, and the other being very cynical and worn down and negative. That relationship between the two is explored in a lot of different and interesting ways, especially throughout seasons 1 through 3. So if you're looking for some good family-friendly but incredibly, you know, awesome and comedic and absurdist humor, then the seasons 1 through 3 of SpongeBob is an absolute gold mine, and it's just endlessly parodied, endlessly referenced, endlessly memed. It's an absolute freaking haven of family-friendly comedy. All that being said, obviously family-friendly experiences are just as capable of telling amazing stories and with style. But where does that leave me, you know? I think that both should definitely exist. It's true that certain stories require a certain level of graphic violence or, you know, whatever else to stay true to the themes and tone of the story. But I also do think it's true that it's totally possible to tell a creative, intelligent, masterful piece of film and still be family friendly. So I don't really think that this is where this ends though. I think that I've got a rant about a few more confuddling factors. As I briefly mentioned earlier, there is a lot of media that is aimed at kids or aimed at the family that treats its audience like it's just stupid, you know? Unfortunately, kids, they're pretty stupid, but they do ultimately have brains inside their skulls somewhere. They're small, they're probably about as big as a peanut, and they just bounce around in there all day, but they do have one. So I do think that kids deserve media that tries to engage with that brain instead of just entertaining it. At the end of the day though, kids are stupid and parents just don't care, so stuff at the lowest common denominator tends to just be the most successful in theaters and stuff. That ultimately leaves us with just landfills full of movies that are just either outright garbage or are painfully boring, like painfully boring. The worst offender in my opinion is Illumination Animation. The first Despicable Me movie is alright, but I would say outside of that, their other work is a masterclass in how to make a nothing movie. The animation style they use is efficient at best. That's the best thing I could call it. You know, there's nothing particularly stylized about it, and it's actually really cheap compared to other studios in the 3D animation world. Not only that, but they are known for reusing character models, reusing world design, and just overall being pretty nondescript in their location building. Their character design and writing is just passable, I would say. But they do rely too heavily on celebrities for their voice acting to sell the movie. Rather than just using actually talented and skilled voice actors, they just lean into like shoving a million celebrities into their movie and then selling it to dumb parents and dumb kids who, you know, oh, I want to see some person I know talk in this animal voice for about 1.5 hours, rather than actually seeing an engaging and fulfilling story. Their worst offense is probably just how blatant they make it that their sole intention is to make money. Everything from the endless shoving of minions down the collective consciousness's throat.
I'm trying to avoid any sort of contact with my eyes with this thing, but it's so bright and yellow. I can't look.
Or the endless sequels to any movie that just makes like its money back. Like, you know, Despicable Me got three movies. Does anyone even remember the plot of the next two? You know, Secret Life of Pets got a sequel. Why? Sing is getting a sequel. Why? Like, are any of these stories really strong enough to even warrant a sequel? Are they even strong enough on their own? No, they're not. And so it's really, really clear that they're just here to make their money and dip. That's not good to me, because while it is possible for family-friendly media to be made and to be a really masterful and good piece of art, what is more common, unfortunately, is these companies take the family for chumps and just sell them garbage because they can get away with it. That's not good. We should demand more of our family-friendly movies. I'd consider that a con to family-friendly filmmaking. But, you know me, I'm fair, I'm balanced, I'm a nuanced guy, so we're gonna talk about maybe a con to edgy filmmaking here. If it's possible for family friendliness to bring down a film, it can also be possible for edginess to bring down a film. Now, a good example to start with would be a film from my favorite director, Sam Raimi, his debut film, The Evil Dead. Now, this is a movie I actually pretty much enjoy for the most of it, but there is one scene where I think he goes maybe a little bit too far. And in this scene, it's essentially depicts a woman getting sexually assaulted by a tree. In a more serious movie, in a more like intense film that maybe had more thematic material that dealt with that kind of thing, I think that scene might be able to work. But I think for the overall comedy horror tone that the rest of the movie has, it doesn't quite fit. It's something that's just a little bit too intense, hits, you know, a little too close to home for some people, and it just doesn't quite fit with the rest of the movie. So I think that that's an example of how doing something edgy just for the sake of it being edgy can sometimes just hurt the overall quality of the film. And Sam Raimi would even agree with this criticism. He says this: "Well, I think it was unnecessarily gratuitous and a little too brutal. And finally, because people were offended in a way that I didn't, my goal is not to offend people. It is to entertain, thrill, scare, make them laugh, but not to offend them. So while The Evil Dead is still an amazing film, I would say that it is brought down a little bit by its attempt to be so edgy in this film, and Sam Raimi would even agree with me, so take that, losers. While there are probably entire islands full of garbage family-friendly movies, there's probably another island full of awful, over-the-top, edgy movies as well. I mean, for every one Hereditary, there's 9 Saw movies. You know, for every one Lighthouse movie, there's 3 Human Centipede movies. I think there are cool things that are possible within the slasher genre, or, you know, the torture porn genre. I think for the most part, they're just films that exist to be bloody, edgy, gory films with not much else to offer. So I think that's also an example of how a film just being edgy just to be edgy, and that's it. To a certain point, it just becomes gratuitous. It just becomes like, your brain turns off after a certain point. It's like, okay, you know, watching Human Centipede 2, like, once you get to the point where he's stomping on a fetus with a gas pedal of a car, it's like, you know, did we really need to get here? Did we really need to get to this point? Like, I just think, like, past a certain point, edginess in films is just, it doesn't really serve any purpose and stops being artistically fulfilling for me. But that's just my opinion. If you're a fan of slasher films, drop your favorite one in the comments. An aspect of family friendliness we're talking about with comedies and blockbusters is the fact that they're just too horny sometimes, man. Especially in the early and late 2000s, man. These movies, they were too sexed up. They were too horny. You know, stuff like some of the worst Adam Sandler movies, some of the bad superhero movies like Catwoman and Daredevil. These movies were just chock full of scenes that are just so unnecessarily horny. Like, I think my favorite example is in Daredevil, where they're playing basketball against each other, but it's like a sexy basketball fight. Or in Mission Impossible 2, if you've seen my Mission Impossible tier list video, then you'll remember the horny car race. Like, scenes like this, it's like, these are movies for the family. You know, the entire family wants to see an impossible mission. The entire family wants to see Daredevil, you know, beat up some bad guys. The entire family doesn't want to see Ben Affleck and Elektra, like, have a really, like, sexually tense basketball scene. That's just my opinion, though. Also, Michael Bay movies, bro. What is that guy doing, dude? This guy, his movies are 50% explosions and 50% hot woman doing hot thing. Like, I mean, when I was a kid, I personally was more interested in Transformers than I was in staring at Megan Fox's butt. Is that just me? I don't know. I mean, I think either way, I'm straying away from the point a little bit here. I'm getting lost in the sauce. All right, so let's hone this down and send this video out. When it comes to art, everything has a right to exist, you know, whether that be the most sanitized, you know, non-offensive, you know, garbage, brainless kids movie, or the most depraved, awful, disgusting, terrible film. I think that they both have a right to exist, but I think what the films I like have in common the most is they have a consistency in tone, you know, they've got a strong thematic material, they've got compelling characters, and they've got a lot of style. I think any movie that does those things is a good movie, and I think that a movie can do those things despite being for the family or even for the just adults, you know. I think that any movie is really capable of that. And so I think what's more important than, you know, looking at a movie based on family friendliness, obviously, is gonna be just the overall quality of it. And this was probably a long video to get to that point. I think most people sort of have that realization, but I would just encourage you to think critically about the movies you watch. You know, think about if something makes you uncomfortable. If you're watching a movie like a horror movie, something scares you, think about why. You know, you might learn something about yourself, you might learn something about the kind of movies you enjoy. If you watch something that you really even just think is garbage, think about it, you know, why did I not like this movie? And you'll learn something. Any kind of art you take into your brain, it's like one more standard by which you compare another piece of art. So I would suggest everyone to just go out and watch movies. You know, watch movies of all kinds. Don't be afraid. That's how I've gone about it, and personally I've had a really great time. And for every garbage movie I've watched, it's helped me discover, you know, 5 more great movies. So I would just encourage y'all to just go out there and ravage some movies, man. Open up that Netflix, open up 2 Netflixes. Watch a movie on 2 screens, you know, 2 movies at the same time, double speed. That way you're getting extra movies at the same time. Hit that like button if you want to. Dislike it. No one can see it anymore though, so good luck with that. Leave a comment, tell me how dumb I am, or leave a comment and, you know, tell me how beautiful and sexy and powerful my brain is. It's up to you. Have a good one though.